Good afternoon and welcome to Ask the SCSA Toolbox Tuesday. My name is Justin Brooks, Safety Advisor for the SCSA, and I'll be presenting today's Toolbox Talk on the First Aid Risk Assessment. Before I start the presentation, I just want to take a moment to discuss a few items before we get going. This presentation is being recorded and will be available for later viewing on Facebook and our YouTube channel. So if you're not following our social media accounts, make sure that after this presentation, give this video a like and a share. Follow our pages to keep up to date with safety in Saskatchewan. So today I will be doing a toolbox talk on first aid risk assessment. All right, so today we'll be hopefully clearing up a topic that has brought up a ton of questions, the first aid risk assessment as detailed in Annex A, the CSA Z 1220-17 first aid kits for the workplace document, has many companies scrambling for a document that would cover all the considerations detailed in the document. We here at the SCSA have created and made available a very easy to use and detailed risk assessment for your workplace. We have this document available on our website under resources. At the top of the page there, you'll see the little tab with resources, documents, forms, and legislation. Click on that and then look under the heading Safety Manual Documents. You'll see the link there for the first aid kit risk assessment. All right, so workplace first aid risk assessment is defined by the 2020 regulations as a process to determine the risk level in a workplace as it relates to the provision of workplace first aid services, first aid kits and supplies as defined in CSA standard. Risk assessment comes up a few times within the 2020 regulations. In Part 5.3c, provision of first aid, it states that the employer, contractor, or owner shall undertake a workplace first aid risk assessment conducted by a competent person to determine the appropriate classification for the place of employment or worksite in accordance with the guidelines as set out in Annex A of the CSA standards. In 5.5, first aid personnel, it states that an employer contractor shall A, provide the personnel set out in Table 9 of the appendix for the level of risk associated with the work carried out at the place of employment as determined by a workplace first aid risk assessment. What this is saying is you have to conduct this assessment at your place of business, whether that be a shop, office, construction site. Hazards have to be assessed and ensure you have the appropriate first aid kit available. Today I'll be going through every section of this form and explain it in full detail. If you'd like more information on the 2020 regulations on first aid, go to YouTube and type SCSA in the search bar. We have a few videos explaining the changes of the regulations, including first aid. Titles and dates to look out for would be the one from the 7th of April, 2021. It was a webinar Wednesday, and it was titled Occupational Health and Safety Regulations 2020. Or the one from 23 March, 2021. It was a toolbox talk titled First Aid Regulations. So this toolbox talk is only going to cover first aid risk assessment. Moving forward to the document itself. So just so you know, this is the document. It's 2 pages. And we'll be going through each section of this document here as you see it, just so you can gain a further understanding of how this all goes together. So let's start with the first spot on the form. So this form starts off like many other forms with the company, business name, location, assessment team, and date. Ensure that you are as specific with the location as possible. If required, geodetic coordinates or detailed approximate locations would work. An example of a detailed approximate location may be something like 6 kilometers north of number 1 highway, east side of grid 362. Just because not everything has an address, we want to make sure that we know the location. All right, so this is right underneath that first spot. So this line asks what the maximum number of workers that will be at the location at any given point. So for example, if you're starting your job and you have 2 workers with you, but once the job is at its peak, there'll be 18. Fill it out for the max number. Planning like this will make it more sense once we dig into the document a little bit more. So finding the hazard. So this is where you'll write in your hazardous job tasks. I've written a small example of what this may look like. Be as detailed as you'd like and use as many pages as required to fill out your job task section. Keep in mind, as the job site changes, new job tasks may be introduced that were not planned for in the beginning. Ideally, you would look for an assessment before the job. You do that assessment before the job begins, and then you would redo it or at least look at it again and review and revise it at every milestone. Having said that, if you're, say, a general contractor and you know the entire scope of the job, you have lots of experience, and there's a good chance you're going to know and understand the entire outline and scope of the project. This will help you outline the construction of the project in steps and analyze the risks involved. So, automation, grade beam construction, steel going up, that type of thing. If this changes, you can simply show these changes on your risk assessment as you would a hazard assessment. So when we look at the table, you see across the top, job task, priority severity, resulting injury, and appropriate first aid kit. Let's go through each one of those titles and just make sure that we're all on the same page with what these mean. So the job task. What is a specific job that is being done at the time? Make sure to think of all the hazards that may arise during that job task and ensure that you're ranking it accordingly in the next spot here, which is priority severity. So the priority and severity is extremely important. We're just trying to find out what the likelihood of something happening and the seriousness of harm that can result from that hazard. The resulting injury. So what is the outcome? If someone was to come into contact with that hazard, what would or most likely would happen? And the appropriate first aid kit. This is the first aid kit required by your priority index table, which is outlined at the bottom of the table. So you can see the priority risk table, red, yellow, green, and what those high priority, medium priority, and low priority ties are to the colors and the priority and severity, as well as the first aid kit types 1 through 3. So first step is writing down those job tasks. You would then give it a rating using the colored chart on that screen that I just pointed out. So now 1A in that top left corner, that would be your highest ranking hazard. On the other end, you'd see 5E. That would be your lowest ranking hazard at your bottom right-hand corner in green. You must rank your job task. This is imperative in determining your appropriate first aid kits. Once you have your job task priority and severity ranking complete, you would then fill in the resulting injury. Doing so helps you determine if you have all the right equipment. The appropriate first aid kit column is filled out last. This column determines what type of first aid kit you would require for the resulting injury. So, for example, our first line, replace facial on the front of the house, is a 2B. This means a hazard. So you can reference again that legend to the right of that colored table. And a type 3 is required for high hazards. Keep in mind that your selection is based upon your highest ranking hazard, as written in bold along the bottom. So for in this example, I'm doing 3 separate jobs. Each requires a different first aid kit. However, I would only require the type 3 because it would be enough to cover what the type 1 and type 2 would supply. Now, keep in mind, when this form, the fake company that I filled this form out for, this is a company that is doing a risk assessment for a specific job that's short in nature. So keep in mind that different companies will have different specs and you'll see different assessments. So again, and I'll explain this at the very end, if you're having difficulty understanding this or how it's going to relate to your company, reach out to us here at Advisory Services and we can help walk you through the process. So, onward. So, other considerations that may affect risk level. So, the second page of this form goes over some areas that may increase your risk level. So, let's go through those. So, the first one, have any of the tasks being performed resulted in a workplace injury in the past? So does your workplace have a history of injuries when performing the listed job tasks? If so, this will increase your workplace risk level and you must plan appropriately. Is the workplace spread over more than one level? This is important due to accessibility to first aid. Although this may not necessarily raise your risk level, it is a consideration with how many first aid kits you have on site. It can raise your risk level if emergency personnel or first aid attendants cannot get to the injured or ill person, or if they require special training to access an area. Make sure all these things are figured out before the job starts. If there are multiple shifts, are there adequate first aid attendants on each shift? You must have the appropriate number of first aid trained workers on site at all times during each shift. It is also important to note that the level of first aid training required by attendants must be consistent in all shifts. Keep in mind there is an NA option for this, so it's not applicable. We don't work, our fake company here doesn't work any other shifts. It's just a few people that work during our regular work time hours. Are there appropriate modes of transportation for transferring injured or ill person and an attendant to a medical facility? So in 512 of the regulations, it speaks the requirements of transportation for injured workers. Keep in mind that if a stretcher is required to be provided in accordance with this assessment, the employer contractor shall ensure that a means of transportation provided is capable of accommodating and securing an occupied stretcher. Distance to the medical facility. So how far away is medical assistance to get help? This is a serious consideration that must be looked at when deciding the level of risk for your employees. So we have it separated into three different times: less than 30 minutes, 30 minutes to 2 hours, and more than 2 hours. These all carry their own level of risk, so ensure you know the distance to a medical facility from your workplace. Does the workplace require any other additional supplies to provide first aid? Additional supplies are required for Class B first aid attendants. Supplies like head immobilization devices, tourniquets, bag valves, all may be required. But keep in mind, these pieces of equipment require specialized training. And then any other considerations that may affect risk level. This is a spot to write down anything else you may that you may think will increase your workplace risk level. All right, so selecting your kit. So here's where you'll select your types and sizes of first aid kits using the data we found by using our first aid risk assessment. Remember in the other consideration section where we asked how many levels there were? This is important because this may determine again how many first aid kits you require. There may be more than one building as well. So check off and write in how many of each you require. Keep in mind that there are 3 types of first aid kits that are decided by the hazard level and 3 sizes. Those sizes are based on the total amount of people at the workplace at one time. When you get to here, you'll need to write in the risk level for your workplace. Using your job task hazard assessment, as well as your other considerations page, you'll determine what your risk level is. All the data collected on this risk assessment is important for many reasons. However, the amount of people at your workplace and the level of hazard determines the level of training required by first aiders. It also determines how many attendants you have. Using this information from the last 2 slides, it's easy to see what is required for this part of the form. You'll write in who will be your workplace first aid attendants, and you will write in their level of training. Ensure you meet the regulations from the previous slide regarding training. You can find this information in the Occupational Regulations 2020, Table 9, as well as in Part 5, Section 5, titled First Aid Personnel. And finally, the supervisor of the workplace and OHC members will sign. Again, this could be more than one member signing or a representative. Keep in mind, we have these documents available in both Word and a fillable PDF, all on our website. Go to scsaonline.ca, go to the Resources tab. Once you hover over that, click on the Documents, Forms, and Legislation link and look for the First Aid Risk Assessment. I just want to make sure everybody knows where to find it, so I'm mentioning it twice, so you don't have to scroll back or whatever if you're watching this after the fact. Just want to make sure we are all on the same page and know where this is. Navigating these new regulations under the harmonization of Canadian first aid standards will be tricky for some, but keep in mind, we have a great team of advisors here over at the Saskatchewan Construction Safety Association that can help. All right, let me just cancel my screen share here and we can end this toolbox talk. So I'd like to take a moment to thank everyone watching. By watching and participating in these discussions, we're all working together and making Saskatchewan the safest construction environment in Canada. Make sure you tune in next week for Toolbox Tuesday at 10 a.m. and our Wednesday webinars, which are on the first Wednesday of every month at noon. I also want to remind everyone that we have all our presentations available on our YouTube channel. These are a fantastic resource for training and toolbox talks, especially if, like us, you're doing a lot of your meetings online. Remember to like and share this video and follow us on all social media platforms. Have a great day, everyone, and work safe.